Okay, we'll say we're going to pretend you're ready to render your picture now, put it all together, and you're feeling pretty happy about all the stuff there is on your scene. I have this mock-up scene here that we'll render, and I'll show you what you would do to go about the process of rendering. The first thing you would want to do is, what is the camera capturing? If you want to know what the camera is capturing, you would need to turn the resolution gauge. The resolution gauge is up here. It lets you see what the camera will crop out when you render. It's like this little circle inside of a white square. If you click on it, that will crop the scene and it will show you the size of the camera. It's telling me my camera is the wrong size. It shows you up here the size of the camera. It's saying 200 by 200 pixels. That's not what I want. Usually we want at least 1920 by 1080 pixels wide. That's one of the things you need to know, is what is the camera size you're using. The other thing is, if your camera is showing the edges of your scene, if you have a small room or something where your scene ends, and you can see those edges, it takes you out of the moment of the picture. Or it's like when you go to the theater and you see the edges of the scenery and the actors are doing all their stuff on the back of the scenery, it takes you out of the moment. So we need to make the camera crop those parts of the scene, or make our scene bigger, or position the camera in a different spot. When you are positioning the camera, you may find, okay, I like this position, and maybe a position from a low angle. Oh, that's showing the edge of my scenery, so I need to move it around. And you will want to save those positions, because you can't remember where the camera was exactly. What you can do is come to the view menu on the viewport window and say bookmark, edit bookmarks. And in here, on this window that shows up, you can give that camera position a name. Let's say medium, and then just apply it to, or add to the shelf, and we can close this now. So now I can move my camera around. Maybe I need to fix something on my scene that I think it doesn't look that great. And I can go back here, back to the view menu, bookmarks, and if you see, my position is still saved there. So I can click on it. That will take me back to that position. And if I like it, I can keep it. If not, I can look for a new one. Let's say I want a low angle here. So I'm going to move my camera around here and say, okay, let's save this one. So bookmarks, edit bookmarks, low angle, then add to shelf and close. So that way you can be saving. I just complained that the name has spaces on it. It doesn't like spaces between words, but you can be saving your positions here of the camera, and then you don't have to remember them. You can keep saving, making changes to your scene without worrying where was the camera before. Now you know where the camera is. You can get it back. And you can also turn this on and off, so you can see what the camera is leaving out of the scene, if it's cropping what you need. The first thing I need to fix now is the size of my camera. So you saw it was really small. If you look up here, there is a few movie slates. We're going to click on the render settings, which is the one with the movie slate with the gear. If I click on it, this will open the render settings menu. The first thing it's going to tell me is, where is the file being saved to? The file is being saved to Drug Clusters Online. It's being saved to the wrong folder. I guess I changed files here and it's saving to the wrong spot. So I can fix that by going back to Files, Set Projects, and tell it where to save. So I can say desktop, there's my Lego file, and just select this folder. You don't have to select the images folder. You can say set, and Maya will find it in there. So you see now my path to save is changed. The other thing is what format you want to save. For this project, it's fine if you use EXRs. You can change it to JPEG if you want to save it as a JPEG and send it to me. That'll be easier to upload online. It'll be less heavy. You just make sure your quality is set to 100%. Down here also is name, number, and extension single frame. If you were rendering a movie, you would change this from name, number, and extension, I'm sorry, name dot extension single frame, you would change that to name number dot extension. But we're just rendering a single image here at the time. We're not worried about it. But if you wanted to render an image sequence, you would change it here, and then it would let you say how many frames of the timeline you want to render. The other thing is, if you have more than one camera here, you can change it to the camera you want. So in here, it just has our default cameras, the perspective, front, side, and top view. And down here is our size. Usually we're going to do 1920 by 1080, which is the default size of most high definition movies nowadays. There is bigger sizes, but the bigger it is, the longer the render will take to happen. With that said, I can close this window. And then let's say I position my camera here. So I'm cropping the edges. And then what I want to do is click on the blank movie slate. I can see two things here. This might take a second to render here because I intentionally made really low power lights. So you will see a couple of problems when the lights are weaker. If you have a daytime scene and all your lights are really strong, you might not see it as much. But with low power lights, you will see a lot of noise in your scene. Why is that? Is because Arnold has to calculate the light bouncing around, and this light is getting weaker and weaker as it bounces around when the light's less strong. What it does, it makes a lot of noise on our scene. You'll see it almost looks like the Arnold render view, the preview, which has a lot of noise when you're moving around the camera. But that is because how many times the lights are calculated bouncing around, and that's called samples. And it's actually not too bad, but you will see it usually on the places that have the least amount of lights. You'll see a lot of noise and graininess, and I will show you what to do if that's the problem you're having. So in here I can see some noise where the light's coming in through this door. It's done rendering. I can see in here, okay, there's a couple areas with problems. So let me just adjust the image here. It's going to tell me down here the size it renders. So it says 1920 by 1080 and how long it took to render. It took 1 minute and 33 seconds. If I zoom in here but with the mouse wheel, I can see there's quite a bit of noise here, especially because the light is coming in very weakly through the window. So we need to fix this. How do you fix it? You go back to the render settings, and if you see, there's a shortcut right here. So we can go back to the render settings, and if you go to the Arnold renderer, there's there's a shortcut to tell you how many times the samples are calculated, and there's one that's applied in general with the camera, which is called camera AA or camera anti-alias. What is anti-alias? You've probably seen it on pictures. There's a picture from Adobe. This picture right here has alias on it, so you can see the start stepping, like the pixels, the low resolution of the image. And then this one has anti-alias, which is kind of like has a blur filter on the edge, so you can't see those pixels anymore, the stair stepping. We're going to do the same to our picture. We're going to apply some anti-alias, and a lot of the times this takes care of most of the problems. There it is. And don't crank this up all the way over here to the top. I mean, all the way up, because the more anti-alias it has, the longer it takes to render. So one thing that I can do is, instead of rendering the whole picture again and waiting for 1.5 minutes to see what's going to happen, I can select a section of the picture to render. I think this is the place with the most noise here, so I'm going to click and drag here to make a square. And I also want to compare the picture before I made my change on the render settings to after. I'm going to save this picture. If you look up here, there's a little square here with a picture inside of it to keep the image. So I'm going to click on it. You will see a bar show up at the bottom. That's telling you, oh, I kept this picture so you can compare it later. You can also erase them if you want to with this button. But you can make changes, render it, and with the bar advanced down here, and that will show you how your changes have affected the picture. So Let's render just that region now to see what the anti-alias is doing. So I'm just going to render the little square here so I don't have to render the whole thing. And let's see how long it takes. It usually takes longer. The more you crank up the samples on each thing, the longer it takes. So usually camera anti-alias, that's a pretty good job. You see in here, it's taking the noise quite a bit down. You can compare it from here to here actually. But if I go like this, if I move the bar, you can see how much noise is taken away. So usually the camera anti-alias will be good enough for an overall reduction of the noise. Sometimes you will have to go by lights. So a lot of the time you'll have a lot of lights on your scene and you don't know which one is the one that's making the shadows be noisy. You'll have to pick light by light and increase the samples on each light. But again, don't go crazy cranking up the samples all the way up on everything, because the more you do that, the longer the scene takes to render. So I have 2 lights on this scene and I don't know which one's the one that is making noise. I can tell that this red light, it's a mesh light, so it's kind of a low power light, so it's making a lot of noise here. If you turn off all the lights, and just render one light at a time, you will know which light is making the noise. So I have only 2 lights on this scene. I have an area light that's giving us this blue hue in here, and I also have the mesh light that's outside. So it's all the way at the bottom. Let's see, there it is, the mesh light. If you look at the properties of these lights, I'm gonna hide the render here for a second. The light itself has samples on it. So if you crank up the sample slowly, you will start decreasing the noise on that light itself and the shadows that that light is making. So I'm going to click here 2 samples and then see if that makes any difference on the render here. So let's render that region again, and actually let's make it smaller. Let's save the image. Let's make our region even smaller so we have less time to wait and we can see the sample's working. Once you see that it's working, you can do just the regular render here with the same button is up here, then up here. You can see how long this little piece will take, instead of waiting for the whole picture. That will take forever. So it's easier to compare small regions of the picture. So let's see if that made any difference, increasing the samples on the light itself. So there it is. Let's compare it to the old one. So it did reduce quite a bit of the noise too. That's the original. That's with samples on the camera increased, so the anti-alias on the camera. This is with the last one, it's with samples on the lights increase. So usually you want to, slowly increase samples, because you can also see this one took only 4 seconds because the square was smaller, but I'm sure it's going to be taking longer to calculate the light bouncing around and taking away the noise. So this is the way you clean up your picture. Once you're happy with it, you can, just render the whole image again. And I'm not going to click it because last time it took a minute and a half, so this time will probably take longer with my increasing the samples. But what you need now is 3 renders for your Lego scene. So I want to see 3 angles of your scene, 2 general ones and 1 close-up. You might have put a lot of work on something. Let's say you made a texture that's really nice on the face, or you model something on the background that you put a lot of work and you think it should have its own picture. That's fine. I just need 3 renders for the assignment. So you can save them from here too. The image is saving already to where you told it to render here. So remember, on the Commons tab, we told it to go and save the images here. So the images are already saved in here. But you can also save the image right from the render view. You just have to pay attention to something here. So we'll click on File and say Save Image. If you save the image, on the right you will see there's 2 save modes. There's Raw Image and Color Manage. By default, this is usually set to Raw Image. and it will make your picture super dark. I'm actually going to save it so you can see the difference. Let's say render raw, and just for the purpose of this, I'm going to save it to the desktop so you can see it a little bit easier. So I'm going to put it on the desktop and save it. And then I'm going to save it again, but this time I'm going to do it right. I'm going to save it as a color manage image. So I'm going to click on color manage and say render color managed. And you'll see the difference immediately here. So we'll save it. And now if I go to my desktop here, just one sec, and I look for the render picture. So let's say render, so there it is. So here's the render raw. See how dark it is? And that's because a raw image has a lot of information on it. If you're a photographer, you probably know about them, but you can adjust the exposure and play with the colors and all that, but you probably don't want to do that. You just probably want to see what you see in Maya, right? So I'm going to click in here, and there's the image. So it looks exactly like what I saw on Maya. So again, when you're saving, just remember to pick on color manage. You don't have a really dark render. This happens every semester. Every student's like, why is my render so dark? Yeah, they just forgot to click this little tiny button here that says color manage. So once you have your render, you can take it to Photoshop and do further improvements to it. You can play with exposure, apply all the other filters to it. But we're going to say you want to render right from Maya. So send me again 3 renders and you can call this scene done.